So Dayton today. Let's go. Yeah. When did that happen?
Yes.
A little bit of breathing room there. I couldn't come to the speaker. I went to churches.
That's okay.
Because it was either go then or go to 8:30 to Senate.
All right, hello everyone. Thank you guys for coming out. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brian Barakin.
And I'm Erica Showski.
And this year we have the honor of serving as the Student Government Association President.
And Vice President.
So the reason that you guys are all here today is because you have questions about, you need clarification about AVIATE or housing, or you just want a path point. And the reason that we are here, this is the first of a new series within SGA called Campus Clarity. We have another one on Wednesday dealing with public safety, but essentially when Erica and I were running to be president and vice president, one of our main administrative priorities was increasing transparency between members of the administration and students, and creating more events like the one we're having today that allows for active communication, open communication between the students and the members of the administration. So because of that, we started this new series called Campus Clarity, where we will be having different topics for every event. Some of them might be a little bit more controversial. Some of them might be, programs that students can view negatively. And really the purpose is for you guys to get your questions answered, to get any rumors or miscommunications cleared up. So with that being said, tonight we have the pleasure of having Danielle Page and Jim Froelich from AVIATE and Housing and Residence Life here to answer any of your questions or concerns about the housing system. So we will turn it over to them right now. So thank you guys so much for all being here. We appreciate it. So if anyone has any questions, raise your hand and we have people with mics that'll walk a mic to you.
Ask whatever, and yeah.
Just do an overview. Yeah. Do an overview. Go philosophy.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Go ahead, your question.
I was just curious if you could give us like an estimate of like what the average path point number is for a person. Like like the highest you've seen right now, or the average, or both.
Okay, so let me start by doing kind of an overview, and that will lead into answering your question. Because it's really hard to pin down an answer that gives you any meaningful data without giving you an overview. So the system of AV is 6 years? This is its 6th year, and it stemmed from a desire for the university to use our housing a little bit more strategically than what we had been doing. Prior to having AVIATE around, housing assignments were given out based on a random number. And there was very little harder than taking a call from a parent and a student, and they say, why didn't I get a housing assignment for next year? I'm a junior, and I really want to live on campus. And us being able to say there was nothing you could do differently, the number just wasn't in your favor, and we unfortunately don't have anything for you. So we looked at a lot of different options to replace that system. And we wanted to make it something that would be fair to all students, that everybody would have an equal opportunity to participate in housing. We know how important that is. I myself am a graduate of the University of Dayton. I was here when the 2-year housing requirement was placed on, and have enjoyed living on campus all 4 years. So I know how important and how vital housing is to the UD experience. When we looked around, we considered grade point average. We considered campus involvement. We considered a number of different factors, but when we modeled it out, we kept coming back to there was always a population that was advantaged and received preferential housing because of their grade point average, their involvement, you name it, everything we came across. We then began to look at what was core to housing and residence life and the things we've been doing for a long time. I would say generations, but I can only speak back until the 80s. And there are things that are core to who we are and help us make the living environment what it is. When I was a student here, I didn't realize how intentional they were, and now reflecting back, I see that the same intentionality that we have now, we had then, it just wasn't as organized. So things like your community building meeting with your RA and fellow, we incorporated those, and those are what make up the residential curriculum and the core foundation of AVIATE. We then opened it up and said, other people on campus are doing great work around our themes in the residential curriculum, so we can make those also PATH eligible. That leads to students earning PATH credit, and if living in 405 Stone Mill, which is the I Love UD house, and the very first 5-person house given away, in most years, not always, but most years, if that's your priority and that's where you want to live, then you can go to as many PATH events as you think possible and earn enough PATH credits and live in that space. If being in university housing is important, but you don't necessarily want to be in the top one, you're happy with a 4-person apartment, then you can choose to be involved in just the things that interest you and that you want to be a part of. So that's the system, and that's where we are today. To answer your question more specifically about what is the average, it's really hard to give an average. And the reason for that is 2 years ago, the average was moved by 2 whole points by the top 10 people earning PATH credit. And so the average became meaningless because of the distribution is what's more important. How many in here are first-year students? First-year students is a little bit easier because first-year students, when you look at the PATH distribution, it looks like a normalized curve. And so the average, the mean and the median are pretty close to each other, and it's about, as of November 28th, about 7.5 was the average. We're going to send out a new update this week. It might be in this week with AVIATE. That will include the actual distribution, and I'll give you guys a preview since you're here. The top 23% of students top 23% of students have 11 PATH credits and greater. The middle 60% are between 3 and 10. And then the bottom 13% or so have less than 4. So that's for the rising sophomore, so the current first years. Now, the upper division is a completely different story, and their PATH distribution is basically a decay. And you've got 4 students, and I'm sure they're in the room right now, who I want to tell them, stop it. Seriously, stop it. You know who you are. You're 4th sophomores, you're living in a garden apartment. I don't know who your 5th roommate are, or is, but the 4 of you right now are 50 points away from earning the top PATH credit that was earned last year. And if you've got a 5th person in your roommate group, and you're going after the 5-person house, you will far exceed the number of PATH credits you need to get 405 Stone Mill if that's your goal. What is what?
What's that point number?
So I hesitate giving that out because it creates what I call a racing condition, where everybody's racing to be that, and you don't have to. So what I'll do is I will tell you some history. Let me finish telling you what the distribution is right now, and then I'll give you a little history about where things have fallen in the past. Let me finish with the distribution. So the distribution right now for upper division spaces, the top 22% of students have 13 and greater. So the top 23% have only earned 13 path credits or more. Now, this is where it gets a little bit squirrely because of those students who are outliers, and they are way out there. They bring the average up to about 20 in that group. Now, that's not where the majority of students are, but those top students are pulling that average up. The next 23% of students have between 7 and 12, and their average is 9. And then 53% of students have 6 or fewer. Yes, 53% have 6 or fewer.
So one of the things that I know, are any of my aces in here? Okay, so one of the things I know a lot of our aces who do the chats with you all and conversations that happen around wanting to earn as many points as I possibly can and access, which I'm sure at some point is going to come up tonight. The numbers that he was just reading, so the average being between, it was like 12 or 13.
The majority of students.
The majority.
Well, the majority of students actually have less than 7.
Okay, less than 7, the majority. We have already had almost 3 times that many distance opportunities, which you don't need to go anywhere for. And so I think that's one of the things that I would say, keeping in mind, kind of, again, anticipating one of the potential questions, is that as students are earning points, you don't have to go anywhere to necessarily achieve some of these goals that we have to achieve path credits. So keeping some of the numbers that you're hearing in mind allows students to pace themselves a little bit differently if that is something that you have as a concern. And it might be worth us maybe just saying what it is that we each specifically do with the program. So I specifically am more of the wizard behind the curtain. So I do all of the 1850 advertisement of the events. I work with all of the campus partners in approving the events that are path eligible. I help oversee the ACE or the ACE staff, AVIATE co-curricular educators, and just trying to help make sure that you all are getting the information that you need. So that this week in AVIATE emails, creating all the printed resources. So trying to help dispel some of the myths and give you the resources that you need to be successful in the way that you want is primarily what my role is.
Question: how does the AVIATE co-curricular educators support students and help students?
Okay, so the question was, how do the AVIATE co-curricular educators, or the ACEs, help students? So we created this position 3 years ago now. We're in our 3rd year. They are your peers. They are hired to be liaisons. So their role really is to have the best understanding that they can of AVIATE and how to engage in the AVIATE program and support you in making sure that you have the same understanding as best as you can. So they will have one-on-one appointments that they can meet with students, and they are path eligible to be able to ask questions, to be able to set out an action plan, to discuss strategies for how to leverage the time that you do have available and the interest that you have for the opportunities that are available. Beyond that, what they also do, and some of the positive changes that hopefully you all have seen have been the direct result of our ACEs. And them hearing from you as peers, some of the frustrations or the points of confusion or the suggestions that could help improve the program, they bring those to us, and then we kind of figure out from there what's feasible with the resources that we have and with the heart of the program not deviating from that. And one of the things of the releasing of the data of how many points are being earned, that's one of the things that came about from conversations with the ACEs. The This Week in AVIATE email that goes out saying these are the events that are happening each week, that's something else that came about from some of the conversation from our ACEs as well.
So I work with the operations side, so that'll include the housing assignments piece and actually converting the path credits into the priorities and working with you on your applications and the actual assignment of the rooms that we have here on campus. I know what your question, the heart of your question about what's the average is how many path credits do I need to get X? And X may be a 5-person house on Stone Mill. It may be a 4-person house in the South Student neighborhood. It's really hard for us to answer that. I was talking with some of the SGA representatives. And what I pointed out is kind of something I hinted to earlier, and that is, even though I've got all of this data right now about the students and what they've earned and where they're living right now, what I don't know and won't know until early to mid-March is how you plan to group up. I alluded a few minutes ago when I was telling that group of 4, stop earning path credits, that I know that right now 4 of them are living together. I'm assuming because 5 persons are usually the most competitive and the most desirable that they're going for a 5-person house, but I don't know that. I also don't know who that 5th person is. The 5th person right now in terms of earning path credits is a female. So it's unlikely to be that person that's going to live with them. There are a variety of students in that lower mix below them, and it's hard for me to know if one of them is going to be joining them. I also don't know where the rest of the students are going to be grouping up. So I can't tell you, right now I see a group of students earning this amount and this is where you'll need to do. Or who's going to be doing special interest in this group that's already started to earn path credits. But what I can tell you is I have recently worked with a grad student who is going to be doing as a independent study this semester. It won't be ready for the housing assignment process, or won't give you a whole lot of information right now, but it will be ready for next August to be able to provide this information. We're going to be doing some analysis of the data to help us figure out who is likely to group up. Do we see patterns of students that want to live together earning the same path credit or going to the same events together? Or are they distributed in some range that we can predict based upon the 5 or 6 years of data? We're going to do the model with 5, and we'll use this year's data to sort of try our theory or our model. And that will help us in being able to determine what you'll need to group up. The other thing that we're going to do with that same data for the upper division is look at it as look at it as blocks, not as students. Because oftentimes I hear, I'd like to get a house on the 500 Lowe's or 400 Kefauver. And to be able to tell students what that point has been as a function of total path credit earned. Because the number of path credit changes every year. And so if I tell you what last year's was, I don't want to set that expectation and then more students go to more events or fewer students go to events, and so then your numbers are out of sync and you either earned more than you needed to, which is not a bad thing, or you didn't earn enough and you resent the process now because you end up in some place you didn't want to be. So we have commissioned those 2 projects that we hope to have finished by the end of the spring semester. We may be able to provide some feedback on the application about blocks and what the path credit has been historically, but that's not going to help you earn. That'll just be more information as you're doing your application and more transparency during the application process.
Is this okay, cool. So I was just wondering, what are the available special interests? Like, what are all of the available special interest options?
The short answer to that is they're infinite. So the way special interest works is it's kind of the capstone of the residential curriculum. If you think about it, in your first year, you have the opportunity to participate in learning living communities. These are very structured. They are integrated with the classroom. The professors talk with the resident assistants that live on that floor. They work together. You have to be enrolled in certain classes to be in those communities. In your sophomore year, we move to a little bit less structure, much like the buildings themselves have a little bit less structure. And they're around themes. And the floors and communities determine how they're going to implement that theme and what they're going to do as a part of living in community in your sophomore year. It's all based on a theme, but you get a lot of autonomy to decide how that's going to happen. When you get to the junior and senior year, we have special interest. And this is where you tell us how you want to use your residential experience to learn. And so it can be anything. Some of my more popular or more favorite examples from the past include, well, there's one right now and they're here, so I'm going to tell them. There are a number of tour guides that got together and said, we would like to get a house that we can show to incoming students because we typically only show the tour rooms in Marycrest to incoming students, and we'd like to show them the whole experience. And so they put together some goals and applied for a house and ended up getting an assignment that is on Frericks, that's close to Albert Emanuel, and able to show incoming students. And when they come for the on-campus open house days, they're directed, if you want to see what the upper division living experience, this house is open. We've had students in biology that, working with their biology professor, they all had to grow 4 fruit-bearing hydroponic plants over the year using different methods. And so they worked with their professor and their advisor and figured out how they were going to do that, who was going to use what methods, and they determined that. We have groups that work with student organizations. UD Miracles, anybody in here in UD Miracles? They've been raising a lot of money for Children's Hospital, and they've had a house for a number of years. And they have meetings in there. A number of years ago, they helped my family raise money for Children's Hospital by hosting us in their house, and we got some people to vote for a video, and they ran it through their house and their organization. So the opportunities are endless. It's what you want to do in the house, and then you communicate that to us, and then we support you in being able to do that. The process for special interest starts right now. You can go online and see what the application looks like and what you'll need to do. The actual application opens up the middle of January and goes till the end of January, in which you'll have to tell us and give us the goals that you have, find an advisor that will work with you, and then we evaluate those applications in February, and we'll give you feedback on things that you might need to change. And then by the end of February, we'll let you know if we've been able to place you as special interest. We don't allow special interest to consume everything. It is capped at 40% of the student neighborhood. It's capped at 40% of a block, so there's no block that's 100% special interest. And your assignment, where you're assigned, is still based on path. So if you're thinking, well, I'm going to go into special interest and I'm not going to do any path credits, that's not going to hold anymore. As I said, 40% of a block fills, we move to the next block. And so if you wanted to get Stone Mill without any path credit, you can't use special interest to do that.
So does it work in a way where it's like you still pick the house? Like, are there designated houses to it, or is it just so like if you were to do special interest and you're like, okay, I would like this house, and you have like you're in that path, like okay, like you have the highest number of people doing special interest, and that's the house you wanted, you would get that house.
It's still the same way as the regular application.
Okay.
You pick a block,
Okay.
and then we preference things on the block.
Okay.
Hi. So first of all, sorry. Oh, do I know?
So my question was just, I know you started off by saying how you guys considered a GPA-based system or an involvement-based system. I know a lot of my friends, and like I'm personally involved with a lot, so I feel like going to these 2-hour path events or going to an hour path event an hour early still is 2 hours. I feel like those take up a lot of time, and it's kind of like, it kind of benefits those who aren't as involved. So have you guys considered like merging it with some involvement on campus?
So I look at that data every year and want to make sure that there isn't still, that this system doesn't disadvantage anyone. And we don't end up in that trap that we had before, that when we looked at all the models, in which there is some particular population that has an advantage over another organization. To date, we have not seen that. The only one that, it's not an advantage, it's more of a correlation, and that is GPA. Relationship to path credits and GPA is almost linear. When you get out above 40 path credits, the data is too small for it to be statistically relevant, but it still holds true for the most part as a linear relationship. The more path credits you have, the higher your GPA. I do look at organizational involvement, and those students that are involved in more organizations are not advantaged or disadvantaged by path. Students that are not involved do not have a statistical advantage over those that are involved. There are majors, or there are no majors. That was the one I was most concerned about. There are no majors that have an advantage. Now, in fairness, there are some that only have 1 or 2 people in that major for a given year, and there's not a statistical relevance for me. I can't determine that. But for those majors that have 5 or more, I'm able to see that there isn't an advantage for them. So when you feel that way, I recognize that, but it's not holding true with the data. And there isn't students that are not involved that are running out and getting all the path credits.
Hi, so first of all, thank you on behalf of STA for being here. Second of all, so a common thing that I hear is like seniors just really wanting the South Student neighborhood. Like, has there been any talk about giving seniors priority? Just because I know that's a common theme that like in the past years, like talking to alumni, it was just juniors kind of ended up on the North Student neighborhood and seniors are on the South Student neighborhood. So, you know, senior year, you want your classmates to be your neighbors. So I just didn't know if that was a talk, like still doing the path by block and points, but giving seniors priority. If that makes sense.
So let me bust that myth. It's not true. The first year of AVIATE, the distribution of juniors and seniors in the North Student neighborhood, College Park, and the South Student neighborhood was within 1/10 of a percentage point from the year before when we did it random. There was no change in it. Now it does fluctuate every year because it's a system that's based on your choices. And so it does fluctuate by up to as much as 10% off of that historical norm, with seniors and juniors taking different spaces, but it has ebbed and flowed. So there has been a year where juniors moved ahead of seniors in the South Student neighborhood, barely ahead. And then it has come back down, and so it does ebb and flow, and so it's not generally changing the composition of the campus. We did, in its first year, in a nod to that, make the tiebreaker on two groups that have the same path credit, credit hours. And so that does give that nod to class. Not always. I know there are some students that came to the university with 50 credit hours. But for the most part, it gives it to the students who have fewer or less time here. Does that make sense?
So one quick question. So is there any way in which the path point system would disadvantage a student that would like maybe apply for housing alone and not as part of a group? So like say a student had, I don't know, like 70 path points or some large number of path points and wanted a specific like housing, but they didn't have a group necessarily. Would that student be disadvantaged in trying to get one of those locations?
You hit on something that's a little bit of a sore spot for me, and it's not in the design of AVIATE the path credit. It's more in a cultural norm that we have here, and that is we are very group-centric. As I look across the nation, some of my peer institutions, we're one of the very few that are this group-centric, and it does create a hardship for students who are by themselves. Now, I will tell you, I have seen if a student has 70 path credits, there are lots of students that would grab that student and say, you want a single bedroom? I got one for you. The students that have a little bit more difficulty are the students that want to be part of a group, but haven't done any path credits. And they're hard to get placed with other students. What we have been able to say throughout all of the history, we've come close a couple of times, but if you want a bed, and you don't care where you're assigned or who you're assigned with, we've been able to say, we can do that. We will guarantee you that you've got a bed for it. We can't necessarily guarantee that you're going to be with the 5 people you want, because we only have so many 5-person houses. But as an individual, we are able to say after the process is done, you had 0 path credits, but you want to live in university housing, and so we'll find you a group that has a student, a hole in their house, because of somebody who is transferring or withdrawing or taking a year off. And so we have been able to fill those for those types of students.
Hi. So how do path points play into like dishwasher, microwave, washer and dryer? How do those play into like which house you get? Does location matter more, or yeah, how does that play?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and one that I hope to get some feedback on here tonight. When AVIATE was launched 6 years ago, we met with a lot of students, we met with open forums, and to get feedback on how the system would work. We initially worked with students and came up with a priority that said, block is the most important. I don't care if it's a tent on this block, but that's what I want. Second was the number of single bedrooms. I want a house with more single bedrooms than I do two-person bedrooms. Third was I'd like it to be newer. Fourth was washer and dryer. And fifth was distance from campus. I think I've left one off. Oh, air conditioning was in there. Air conditioning ranked high. Now, every one of our properties has now been air conditioning, so we take that out of the mix now because it's no longer relevant. What I have heard, well, in that first year, that's what we used. And that was the system that was applied. And so when it was your turn up, you had enough path credits to get a house on the 400 block of Kefauver. So then we used that algorithm to determine the next available house based on the single bedroom, the dishwasher, or the washer dryer, air conditioning, close to campus, and picked which house you were going to be assigned to. I had a lot of feedback that first year that said, well, that's great, but washer and dryer is more important to me than single bedrooms. And so we said, okay, the group leader in the second year, the group leader has the option to move those things around and change the order of the priority. So if a washer and dryer is first for you and you don't care where you live, you can put washer and dryer as the top and we'll find you a house, if there's any available, with a washer and dryer. Very few students take advantage of that. About 10% of the groups that apply rearrange that order. The rest of them leave it as the default. I did hear a lot of feedback this year that the default may no longer be relevant. That, I see your president going, yes, I agree with that. I've heard a lot of feedback that the single bedroom is no longer as important as a washer and dryer. And that students would say, block is still number one for the default. New and renovated would be number 2. Washer and dryer would be number 3. Then single bedrooms and dishwasher. And I'm kind of hearing, by looking at nods of heads and things, that seems to be the general consensus, that should be the new default. So if you don't change it, dishwasher should be or new and renovated should be number 1 behind the block, and then dishwasher. And that's something we can absolutely change, but you also have the ability to change it on your own as a group.
Okay, so this more has to do with like preferencing blocks. So, for example, if I have a group of 5 and we have the same amount, or we have a little less amount of points than another group of 5, we want to preference, say, 200 block of Kefauver or something like that, and then that's our number 1, and they put it at the other group that we're maybe up against put it as their 3rd preference. Would we have a better chance of getting it than them, even though we had less points, even like say it was fairly close, or how does that work exactly?
So we do the assignment for groups in the order that they're queued up. Okay. Basically, we go through at the very beginning of the process. And let me break this down into 2 parts, because I'm assuming you're going to be in the junior-senior pool, but let me explain it for sophomores, the first years in the room, so they understand. The sophomore assignment process is a little bit different because sophomores are required to live with us, and every student is going to get a bed out of that process. We also allow sophomores to request assignments as 2, 4, or 6. That means that in order for the system to be fair, we have to take the average path credit for the group. So a 2-person that averages 20 path credits would be above a 4-person that averages 19. And they're ordered in the order based upon all the tiebreakers. So that would include path credits, their credit hours, and then we do use a random number. But in the last couple of years, we've never gotten to the random number. And so we create that order. Then we actually start at the top and we go straight down through the order and we look at their preferences, and if their first preference is available, they get it. If it's not available, we go until we find one that is available, and that's where they're assigned. When it comes to the junior and senior process, or the upper division process, we do the same thing. We prioritize them, but in this particular case, we do it based upon group size, because a 5-person group only fits into a 5-person space. And so you're only competing against people or groups that are the same size. So we don't have to do the average, we do the total. We do the total path credit. then your credit hours, then the random number, and create the order in which people are going to be assigned. So if you have less than a group, and none of their other priorities are available, they would end up getting into that 200 block. And then when it got to your turn, if there was anything available in the 200 block, even though it's your first preference, that would be what we would look to, is what your first preference is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Why don't doors open earlier?
Where are you?
Oh, I'm over here, I'm sorry. Why don't doors open earlier for path points? As you know, some path points are more desirable than others, and students show up multiple hours early, and they have to wait outside. And then, you know, the room fills up, and someone just wasted 2 hours sitting outside, and they don't even get to come in and get a path point. Why can't we have the doors open, let the room fill up, and once it's full, people just have to walk away, but they didn't waste 2 hours sitting outside, and then they didn't get a path point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in the years that we have seen recently, we've noticed that becoming a bigger issue than in the earlier years, this race mentality that Jim had talked a little bit about. So the fact of us telling students and asking not to go into the space was actually the result of campus partner feedback, where as a campus partner, they would find themselves entering a room that was already exceeded capacity, because what our policy is, you have to have a seat. We have to follow fire code, and if you don't have a seat. And so what was happening is that we couldn't actually determine who got there first, and if it's over capacity, we have to ask people to leave. So there was some unfairness there if we had to ask students to leave without knowing who actually arrived the earliest. But also, with students arriving so much earlier, there are a number of partnered events where they have some setup to do. And so when they're in a room that is bulging at the seams with individuals, it's difficult and also a little bit stressful for them to set up the space to do what they need to prepare in a meaningful way for that opportunity. And so as we were conferring with our campus partners, we said, let's ask students to wait outside of the space until the time begins, so that campus partners can come in, they can get settled, they have that opportunity, and also we know who actually arrives first. Now the challenge with that, which is what I'm hearing, is you don't necessarily know how many people are ahead of you if you don't check. And so, you know, I can't speak to all of the spaces to know what that looks like, but as students are lining up in a space, if you know it's in 331 KU, you know that's a smaller room. You can kind of gauge how many seats you think that might be. It can also be something we could potentially look into, is thinking about, because I know our ACEs will always count out how many tickets they're going to distribute for an event. If we know the space because they're consistently used the same, we could potentially consider ways to advertise this as how many seats are available. And as you walk by, you can then see, I mean, if you needed to count, for example. Beyond that, though, I think it is something that we have come to a point of needing to figure out as well, and there's some other larger concerns around not only space exceeding capacity, but some of the conduct that's happening as students are waiting for this for the events, that I think, you know, similar to housing, when you make your choice of what properties you want, that's your choice. We can't tell you what choice to make for your properties. In the same way, we can't choose for students which events they want to attend, or which events they want to attend early and how early they want to attend them. And so some of that student culture that is evolving, we are also at a point where we need to figure out how to meet you all where you are, while also being respectful, especially in classroom buildings, where we hear from faculty now the disruptions that are happening, or damage being done to property while students are waiting in hallways and causing damage. And so it is something that we're aware of, and definitely, I think, open to suggestions.
So, two things about this. One, it is quite possible in the not so distant future that because of that that rush to get those spaces, there may be rooms that may become off limits to PAC eligible events. Arch Street has already talked to us twice about locations in which students are gathering outside the hallways and being disruptive to a faculty member who's conducting a class in the space prior to it being used. And we've heard feedback from here in KU about the same thing. The second thing, and this ties to a question I often get, but I haven't heard specifically yet, and that is, what should I go to? And again, we can't tell you, but my advice to you on this element is go to all of the AVIATE residential curriculum. These are the things that are put on in your living area. Go to your community building meetings, go talk with your RA or fellow. You can substitute that with talking with campus ministry. Oh, in addition, you can also talk with campus ministry. These things, complete your community living agreement. These are things that we know work to create solid communities where you live. Like I said, we've been doing them for generations. That will get you between 13 and 15 path credit, right there by doing those events. Look at the distance modules or the online modules, find the ones that interest you, pick up another 5, and then look at the ones that are relevant to you and go to those events. You'll pick up another 5 to 6. Right there, you're over 20 path credits. And every one of the event or every one of the types of housing that we had last year for juniors and seniors, if you had over 20 path credits, you got something. You might not have gotten your top priority, 5-person in particular, but you got something in a 5-person house. So you don't have to go to every event. You don't have to sit in the hallway for 2 hours to get that one path credit, to get over 50 path credits. Somebody's got a mic.
Are you all associated with, sorry, I'm right here. Are you all associated with Property Viewer? And if so, when will it be updated?
I am associated with Property Viewer, and I'm happy to say we have a graduate student that works in our office. His name is Mario Rincon. He spent this entire summer taking pictures, walking through every house, and the Property Viewer is right now accurate for every house as of August. There are a handful of houses that we have put washers and dryers in. We're talking like 3 since middle of August. But right now, the Property Viewer reflects everything that we have in our inventory. If you go look at it today, it's about 440 spaces. That includes houses and apartments that we know right now will be available for juniors and seniors. There's a picture of the front of every space, the amenities that are on it, as well as the floor plans. So as of right now, you can go look and it shows you everything. As we go through assignment processes and people are placed into those locations, they will disappear. And then after the process is done, we'll re-enable everything to show you all of them. So right now it's up to date and is ready to go.
Hi. My question specifically catered towards people that study abroad, co-op. So I understand that you said that there are a lot of online opportunities and people, aren't using them, but you also said that 23% of people are the higher average and it's not really the majority. But those higher houses are, preferable for most people and people want them. And I personally know 3 people in 3 separate groups kicked out because they were co-oping or studying abroad because they still don't feel that they get enough path points that way. I co-opted in Dayton so that I could be with my roommates and still do path points to get the house that we wanted. So how do you feel like tackling that situation? I understand you're adding more online opportunities, but those are also available to every student. And I think when I talk to my ACE chat, the average for path points is going up. So even though you're adding more online ones, I feel like it's still an opportunity for everyone, not just specifically for people that actually can't have the opportunities everyone has.
So the average isn't going up right now. There's no evidence that the average is going up. What's happening is those few people at the top are racing and getting more. So the average is going up, but you're talking hundredths of a point, not dramatically. The study abroad opportunities, or the opportunities for study abroad students and co-op students have to really be broken down and examined by semester. Because there is a path, no pun intended, to a property for those students. If you are co-oping in the fall, then you need to take advantage, and this is an important change, so everybody should listen to what I'm about to say. If you have a friend who's studying abroad or co-oping right now, remind them that to get baseline, they have to actually notify us this year. It's a subtle change. In the past, we've actually gone out and looked for students and said, you look like you might need baseline, and reached out to students and then given it. We're now asking students that if you are away from campus, complete this form and we'll give you the baseline. But if you're doing it in the fall, complete the form and you get the majority of the baseline path credit, because those up to 8 in the fall. Again, you do a couple of online events and you are well above the average. If you are studying abroad or co-oping in the spring, which is the vast majority of our students, you have the opportunity to earn more path credits in the fall when the majority of the path credits are available for students to earn. So far we've had, do you know the number? Total path credits right now?
Total path credits.
Total events. It's like 320?
No, it's around 280.
Okay, so about 280 right now that you could have had the opportunity to attend. I've looked, and students that are studying abroad and co-oping don't end up with fewer than the average. In fact, they are actually above the average for their particular size groups. And so we're not seeing that they're disadvantaged. Again, it goes to something that I do have concerns about. That's the group-centric nature in which our groups are looking at what they feel and making decisions upon what they think it is rather than what the actual data is. If you have a question or a group has a question, we're more than happy to look at the circumstances for that group and say, no, you're positioned where you need to be. We've also, like I said, given more information this year about ranges and the distribution of path credit. So hopefully those groups that you're talking about will look at that data before making a decision to ask a student to leave that they really didn't need to.
One other thing you had said about how we address it. So this year with the change in the new baseline verification form that's required, in the past, the baseline, it's never been the average. The baseline was never the average, but it was dependent on the number of events that we had in residence, so part of our residential curriculum. Because that fluctuated from year to year, we actually did away with making it the number of events that happen in Res Life, and we made it slightly higher than what it has been historically. So for example, last year, I think for one group it was 7 points you could earn in the fall and 5 in the spring. As Jim had said, the majority of students study abroad in the spring. Now it's 8 in the fall and 8 in the spring. So you're actually, if you're studying abroad or co-oping, getting more baseline points, or you're eligible for more than we've had in any year past. So it is a little bit higher.
I have 2 questions.
So we have time for one.
Okay. You guys we were talking about like earlier people waiting in lines and stuff. I may be wrong, but I feel like freshman year there were like more events that you could RSVP to. Is that has that gone down, or like is there a reason?
So, well, what year are you?
Junior right now.
Okay. So as an AVIATE rule or policy for our campus partners, we discourage RSVP. There are some that you'll see a link that'll say, please RSVP if you'd like to participate in those events. Typically it's because they either are serving catering of some sort, there's a lunch involved, or they have a way that they're actually managing and communicating to students once a cap has been reached. The reason why we can't move towards a system of RSVP is, as you can imagine, if it's just a matter of saying, yes, I plan to go, then it just becomes a race of being the first person to click RSVP for that event, and there's no commitment on that end. Not only that, but then that means that for an event where maybe there's 500 chairs, the people at the doors have to check to make sure that everyone has actually RSVP'd and negotiate that. And so in trying to streamline our process and make it as accessible to students and also avoid the frustration in the moment, we will not move towards an RSV policy unless the campus partner really needs it for whatever reason for their purposes.
A number of changes has happened in the AVIATE system, whether it be the curriculum side or the implementation of PATH and the assignment. We are always open to suggestions, and so, in fact, the email that's going out with This Week in AVIATE showing the distribution of PATH credit, is a direct result of a student coming, I think it was the ACEs, that came to us and said, hey, we've had conversations, and we know you don't want to put out the average because it could be misleading. But what about if you showed ranges and they break down in a quarter system? And that we can do that. That's reasonable, and it shows a lot of useful information for students. If you have an idea in your head and you think, well, this is so simple, they would have already thought of it, or there's no use in me presenting it, feel free to email us at aviate@udayton.edu if you've got a suggestion for how we can help tackle this issue of students going 2 hours before an event. I keep saying it's not necessary. You don't have to go to every event, but I'm not getting through. To be honest, I feel a little bit like I'm talking to my 8-year-old sometimes when I say that. But you don't have to go to every event. You don't have to line up 2 hours beforehand. But if you've got an idea for how we can help manage that, please let us know. And email us at aviate@udayton.edu.
All right, we have 2 more questions. One's right there, and the other person has the mic, and then we'll be out of time. So who's got the mic over here? Go ahead.
Hi, so I have a question going back to the process of preferencing housing. And I know one thing that my roommate group struggled with a lot this year was choosing what blocks to preference, because there's, depending on what block you're looking at, there might be more houses that fit what you want, whereas in another block might have better houses. And I'm just wondering if there have been any efforts or talks into letting us preference specific properties so that we can say preference one house on one block and then we don't get that one, preference another one in another block. Because from the outside looking in, it seems like that would be easier for a lot of different reasons. I know you know more than I do, so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that and if there have been any talks of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've wrestled with for a number of years. We modeled out a system about 3 years ago, and in the models, it failed miserably, and more students were not assigned housing than were assigned housing, because we've got close to, let's just say for sake of arguments, 400 different locations that you can select and prioritize. We have 55 blocks. Students ended up only doing, they got bored and tired after doing like 20 to 30 of them. And so then they ended up leaving a bunch out of the list, and they weren't high enough to get those 30 that they selected. So it ended up causing students to not get an assignment where they had plenty of path credits to get something that in the end they would have considered reasonable. And so we are not going to go in the direction of allowing you to preference individual housing, because it just gets too dangerous and people not getting what that is something that's acceptable to them because of the complexity of filling out the application. However, I'm about 90% sure this is going to happen. It's based on feedback from last year. We had a lot of groups that said, I really wish I could see what the order of the houses are that I would be assigned based upon my block preferences. And we can do that. And so we turn on a feedback form. For those of you who have never been through the process, for juniors and seniors, we can't turn on feedback until we have a good idea of who's grouping up with who. So the application process has historically been 2 weeks, and on the second week, sometime Monday, Tuesday-ish, it's been as late as Wednesday depending upon how fast students complete the application. Once we have a critical mass of applications in, then we turn on this feedback tool that shows you how many points the top group in your size has, where you fall, what your ranking is, and then it also shows you your block preferences as you're going through. We are going to be modifying that a little bit more this year, and so after the group leader sets the preferences, all members of the group will be able to see the blocks as well as the houses based upon the sort order that the group leader has set. So you'll be able to go into your application and see, oh, they put 500 block of lows first, and then the 400 block of lows. And this is what it's resulting in terms of the houses for the size group we are, and the order in which they're going to be assigned out. Does that make sense? So you'll be able to see the houses, and then you can tweak your preferences, you can tweak the block orders to be able to get the order that you're looking for. We're just not going to do an individual house ranking.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on the point where you say you don't necessarily have to show up an hour early for an event, which I get what you're saying. So like,
I try to strategically look at events that seem to have bigger rooms, so I'm like, okay, I can get there 15 minutes early, not an hour and a half or whatever. The biggest issue I've had this year, and many of other individuals have, is that, so I have a certain class schedule, it's the same every week, certain activity schedule with certain organizations, I have meetings basically at the same times every week. If path points are during those times, I cannot go. I miss repeated path events, especially Monday, Wednesday afternoons, which is where a lot of events occur because I have classes that go until 4:50 in the afternoon. So I do have to go to certain events an hour early because it's the only event I can get to during the week. I actually might have a 2-hour block here, which I'm like, crap, I got to spend that those 2 hours getting 1 point. So yes, I get it. You can pick and choose what you want to go, you say, but at the same time, at the end of the day, we all have class schedules and certain things we have to be at, and that may sit for many students when these points occur. So that's an issue.
So let me answer that first, and then I'll turn it over to Danielle. So my point was, you don't need as many points as you think you do. So it wasn't that you don't have to go an hour beforehand, it's that you don't have to go to that event. Students tend to get far more than what they actually need. Now let me clarify that by saying, if a specific house is your goal, then yes, you do need to go to those events. But if getting a location is what's important to you, then you don't have to necessarily go there. The second part that I just want to address slightly is that we do look at the distribution of events as well as path. And so we know that we try to make them available on all days of the week. Now there are some days that have lower events. Friday and Saturday evenings have far fewer events, almost approaching 0, I think, than any other day of the week. But the rest of the days and the hours during the day, we do schedule them, or try to get them scheduled to fill all of those blocks. Recognizing, as you say, students have different schedules and events that they can't get to because of class shouldn't disadvantage them. So we try to make all of that possible and the distribution available for the opportunities.
There's a lot more events in the afternoon though than the morning, and I actually have
the evening is when the most are. There are fewer events before 5 o'clock. The number of events is much smaller than the number after events, and I'm talking orders of magnitude smaller. It's not even close, the number of events that are before 5 as compared to after 5.
What about students with night classes multiple days a week and afternoon? Like, for example, there's very few events before 11 o'clock, I've noticed. So, like, that's when most of my days are open.
And so, in the ways in which we are looking at the data, one of the things that I would say is, if you, and I won't ask you how many you have, however many points you have, but if you don't presently have 30 or more points, if you don't have at least 30 points, then I can tell you have already not taken advantage of all the distance, all the opportunities that you can schedule based on your availability with individuals, based on things that happen, with your flexibility. The events that you're talking about that fill up, that are at the varied times, those are going to be beyond that 30 points. So based on the numbers that we're seeing of how many points the average student or the majority or top earning students have, those points alone, if you took advantage of those, would already have you being far beyond what we're seeing in some of our top earners. And so I think that's where, in trying to offer some numbers to kind of point out what he's saying, that yes, we understand that there's not necessarily going to be everyone's schedule, but that's why we also build in some of those more flexible opportunities that you get to do based on your schedule. And if you're looking to get more than 30, today, and the other ones don't meet your criteria, again, that's where we know we're continuing to have some of those other opportunities scheduled, and everyone's pointing to the same numbers.
There's no size house that required you to have more than 30 path credits to get that size. Let me make clear that. There is no size property that required more than 30 to get one in that size. Now, to get the first house we assigned requires more, but to just get a house that's a 5-person house, or a 4-person, or a 6-person, or an 8-person, or a 3-person did not require more than 30.
So thank you guys all for coming. We hope that you learned something. And
hold on. Okay,
we need you to fill out your exit slip in order to receive a path point. So you need to fill that out, and you'll earn credit.
We have people that will collect the slips and swipe you guys out for credit at both doors. We also, hold on, guys. We have President Spina and Vice President Fisher here. If you guys have any